Hi everyone, this is Billy Aria of Real Life. I'm coming to you from inside the Resistance Studio. I'm here because, and some of the team members are here. Of course, Katrina is here, and our advisor, the original messenger, is here. And but I'm here at the mic now. I want to talk to you about a few things that has been troubling not only myself, Katrina, our advisor, but the team members as well. And we want you to really take this in and understand it. We're going to bring you some videos we want you to watch and listen very closely to the videos that we're presenting. One video is very touching. Um, if you sit there and listen and watch this video and you don't feel anything, then something is wrong with you. We'll talk more so about our ancestors of long ago, and we have learned from and about our ancestors. But there have been ancestors that suffered and struggled during the time way back then that were never mentioned. And so, this video that you all will be watching, the first video, you will know and become accustomed to the ancestors that we have never met, that never been talked about, never has been presented to any one of us. And so, listen to this video and get the understanding and let it sink deep into your hearts, because while listening to it you will get that feeling that they're right there with you and that you can feel their emotions and their sorrows and their struggles. So just listen to it. And the second video that will be presented is about those who voted for Trump. you know I know it's over, he's in office, but those who favored, because we told you many times before, no one voted for Trump, but you don't believe that. You think that, you went out to the polls and your vote count. No, what you did, you favored him, and they made it appear and seem to you all that you actually for him with your ballots, but it has never been in existence, even at the time of our ancestors. And so those who favored him, the blacks as well as the whites, now they're beginning to see the real picture, or the inside as well as outside of number 47. You thought that he was going to do one thing because he said so, and then he turned around and he did something else. And now that you see that he has changed his mind and that he is doing this something else, a lot of you black people, you white people too, but I'm talking about our black brothers and sisters, and we, the resistance team, we beg you not to do this. But you went out and you did it anyway. And now you see that the very thing that he said that he wasn't going to do, he is doing it. Trump has no soul, people. His soul has left him. He wants to be a dictator, and he's not going to rest until he becomes the dictator. That's why he's taking everything away from the blacks. Sure, it's affecting the whites too, but the hardship is upon the black race of people. So we want you to watch these two videos and understand exactly what's going on, especially the first one, because there are ancestors that they talked about in history books, that they wanted us to know even at that time. But there are a lot of ancestors that we don't know anything about, who have been forgotten, who have died trying to allow us to have freedom and justice. And they died from, trying to achieve that. There's so many things about our ancestors of long ago. They had things, but they were taken out because the other races wanted what they had. And so we only have heard about, the black ancestors like Harriet Tubman and uh, so many others, but there are so many out there who have been forgotten and that they have kept from our ears, from our knowledge of knowing. And this is why 47 has removed everything that pertains to the black people of long ago. And even today, he's removing everything, because the more we know about our ancestors, the more knowledge that we have. and the more power that we will gain. And this is why he has taken everything completely away. But I say to you all, I, Katrina, the original messenger, our advisor, as well as the whole entire team, we say to you all, keep learning. Knowledge is obtained, whereas power is gained. Gain that power. Never forget who your ancestors were. Always remember all and know the truth about your ancestors. Know them when you have looked at the history books or when you have heard about them. They're speaking to your very spirit. They're speaking to you. They don't want us to come the way that they came because they had hardships. They had the struggles, but they want us to be better. So the only thing I can say to you is listen and watch the videos. Number one, that gonna bring, and number two, and just get to understanding. And I will say about number two, now you are feeling the sorrows of going out favoring Donald Trump. Now you feel it, and some of you are crying, some of you are heartbroken because you thought that this man was going to come into your favor, and then he turned around and he did something else. We tried to warn you all, but you see, sometimes you think people are simple minded. You think people don't know what time or day it is. And when they try to share that knowledge with you, because they are not on the level that you're on, because you feel that they're not with you, they're talking nonsense. And now, those who favor Donald Trump, everyone has to suffer for their mistakes. So here's the video. Watch it. Okay? This is me, Billy Oreo, Real Life.
Some people say that black people complain too much. They say that we're too focused on what happened to us, too preoccupied with the past. They say it like the racism and injustice of yesterday has no bearing on the racism and injustice of today. They say, sure, it was bad, but it was a long time ago. You never went through that. You never saw a cross burning on your front lawn. You never knew anyone who was lynched. They talk like that fear and that terror and that violence belongs solely to another era. And we should just let it go. Let bygones be bygones. Don't dwell on it. That's what they say. Like we don't carry this in our DNA and in our bones. Like the ones who came before us didn't pass the stories down of what was done to them, of what could still be done to us. Like they didn't teach us how to move and how to stay alive and how to keep your head down in the land where injustice was always waiting around the corner. They say, let it go. But they never had to live with it. Passed down the stories, the silences, and the fear that still lingers in our blood. They talk about the Klan like it was just a few bad men, a few angry mobs. They refuse to see the pattern, refuse to see the engineered plans. But what if it wasn't just hate? What if it wasn't just chaos? What if it was order, built on purpose, trained to terrorize, disguised as law, and carried out not just by cowards in robes, but by deputies and judges and neighbors in towns? This story is about the truth. That injustice against black people wasn't just permitted, it was practiced and perfected and protected. It was injustice by design. This is the second story in that series, Injustice by Design, where we're exploring this truth, that what happened to us wasn't random. It was systemic, it was strategic and sustained. In the first story, we introduced a forgotten black man, a man named Ned Thompson, a man born in slavery, freed by law, only to die in slavery because the system still saw him as chattel and not a citizen. And in this next story, we're going to talk about another black life, a man who was warned, a man who was hunted, a man who died because the system that was supposed to protect him was working exactly as it was designed to. The story we're telling today, it is not famous. It's not in textbooks. There is no museum that is named after him. But we will say his name because what happened to George Green was not a mistake. It was a message. And we remember it because forgetting it is exactly what the system was counting on. So I want you to stay with me throughout this video because what happened next, it wasn't new and it wasn't accidental. It was the same pattern we've seen for generations. Sometime around 1867 or 1868, A freedman named David Macy received a note on his door. And when I say freedman, I mean that he was enslaved and freed only after emancipation came in 1865. David lived in South Carolina, the first state to secede from the Union and start the Civil War, a state that fought hard to keep and preserve slavery, a state that was not ready to let go of its bonded past and not ready to embrace our freed future, a state where seeing a black man as anything other than property was like seeing the sky as anything other than blue. Oil and water didn't mix, and neither did black and free. But it wasn't just black and free. It was black and citizen. And to them, that was the real threat. And I use the term citizen here because citizens are entitled to rights. Citizens are entitled to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Citizens are entitled to rely on the promise that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what black citizens were entitled to. The Declaration of Independence now applied to us. And I'll take it one step further. With emancipation, black citizens were now included in the We the People of the United States, who came together to form a more perfect union to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to secure the blessings of liberty. That's what the preamble to the Constitution says. And black people wanted all of it. We wanted all of the freedom, all of the liberty, and none of the slavery, and none of the bondage. That's what David Macy wanted. Enslaved, but now free. Once property, but now a citizen. That's all he wanted. Then he got that note on his door. The note read, alive today and dead tomorrow if you don't leave. 6 unplugs plan. We have nothing to eat but the flesh of man. Band of nights and banished by day. Old Dave, get out of the way. Now this wasn't some riddle. It was not a poem. It was a threat that was written in rhyme, but spoken in the language of terror. It was a message, a declaration of their kind of independence. Because for them, David Macy was no citizen. And when you were black, freedom always came with an expiration date. The note was left by 2 white men named Bowers and Ward. They ran an illegal still, a still meaning that it was a secret setup to distill alcohol, moonshine, unlicensed, untaxed, and illegal. And they believed that David Macy had reported them to the government. Now, this wasn't their first threat to him. Bowers had already come to David's house once before, stood in front of his wife, lit his pipe, and stared at her in silence, and then just walked away. He never said a word. But the message was clear: intimidation. And as far as we know, David didn't leave. He survived that scare. Nothing happened to Bowers or Ward because their actions weren't technically violent, and David had no proof to bring forward. But there's something important to understand here. Bowers and Ward weren't acting alone. They were part of a group that predated the Klan, a group known in South Carolina as the Bushwhackers, a local vigilante crew that sprang up after the Civil War with one mission in mind: to disrupt black people's pursuit of citizenship and economic freedom. They burned homes and frightened families and left threats on doors. Sometimes it was a handwritten note. Other times it was a coffin left right at the front steps, marked with strange symbols etched with cryptic language, like the note they left for Dave. But they were unorganized, uncoordinated. And that lack of efficiency, that lack of structure, paved the way for something darker to take hold. A group that wouldn't just intimidate black people, it would organize the terror, refine it, and perfect it. The group we now know by just one word: the Klan. And this story is not about someone who survived the scare, not about someone who lived to tell. His name was George Green, and he would not be so lucky because he didn't face the Bushwhackers. He didn't wake up to a spooky note on his door. He faced the Klan. How can all men are created equal live side by side with a group like the Klan? Well, to understand what happened to George Green, I need to give you some history on this group first. And to be honest, I have a feeling that you're going to learn some things that you didn't know about them, because I know I did. I saw just how they perfected persecution, how they branded brutality, and how they honed horror all for us. All for black people trying to live free. And the rule of law is stood by and watched and celebrated even. The Klan didn't start out as a national machine of racial terror. It started as a joke. Not in a field or in a church or at a lynching. It started in a judge's office with 6 ex-Confederate soldiers sitting in Pulaski, Tennessee, trying to pass the time in 1865. They were bored and unemployed and defeated, trying to rebuild their pride after losing a war that they started. So they came up with a name, a costume, a little club to play dress up. They called themselves the Ku Klux, a Greek word for circle. And from that came Ku Klux, and then the Klan. They gave themselves titles like Grand Cyclops and Grand Turk and Grand Magi. They even had names like ghouls and furries and hydras and lictors. They wanted it to feel official, to look powerful, to sound like something ancient. At first, they said it was all just for fun. They paraded around in costumes, they made up rituals, they knocked on black people's doors at night to scare them. One of the Klan's well-known tricks, if you can even call it that, was a ritual they liked to play on black families at night. A Klansman would ride up to a black person's house on horseback in full regalia, and then knock on the door. Then, in a deep and hollow voice, he would ask for a bucket of water. The black family, scared but trying to stay safe, would bring him some water. Bring him one bucket, then another, and another, and another. And then the Klansman would drink buckets and buckets of water, more than any man could possibly consume. But here's what the family couldn't see. Underneath the robe, there was hidden a tube. He wasn't drinking. He was funneling the water into the tube into his robe. And when he finally finished, he would look at the black family in the eye and say, "I'm just so thirsty. I haven't had a drink since I died at Gettysburg." Now, if you know your American history, you know that Gettysburg was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, where nearly 50,000 soldiers lost their lives. So what was this? It wasn't just a prank. It was a psychological weapon, a twisted attempt to make black families believe that Confederate soldiers were rising from the grave to haunt them for daring to live free. Terror dressed up as a ghost story, but enforced with real power. Because behind the costume was a real man with real hatred and a system behind him that would protect everything that he did. The Klan thrived in South Carolina not just because of what they believed, but because of what the state already accepted. You see, this state had a long tradition of community-based violence disguised as law and order. Slave patrols and black code patrols. Mob justice dressed up as protection. And when slavery ended, those same instincts didn't just go away. They just put on new robes. The Klan didn't just punish black voters, they punished black dignity. A free woman said no to working for a white man. And the man told her plainly, "You'll be Ku Klux for that." And she was. A black fiddler played music at a party on land owned by a white widow with her permission. But the guests were black, so the Klan came. A black preacher named Isaac told the community that he and his wife planned to raise their unborn child as good and as nice as anybody's child. That's all they said. And the Klan beat both of them. Because in their eyes, black pride was a crime, black hope was a threat, and black independence that had to be punished. So no, this wasn't just about elections, it wasn't just about pranks. This was about control. Control of black voters, control of black labor, control of the black spirit, control of black people's present and future. This wasn't just hatred, it was hierarchy, and it was enforced intentionally, systematically, by design. And it got so bad, so lawless, so brazen, that even the President of the United States had to step in. In 1871, Ulysses S. Grant ordered a federal crackdown, massive arrests. Hundreds of Klan members rounded up, over 600 arrested, more than 200 indicted, but fewer than 60 were actually convicted. Because even when the federal government showed up, the system still found a way to protect the very people who had terrorized black citizens for years. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into all of that right there because that right there is an entire deep dive all by itself that could last 2 hours. But I do want you to see the beginnings of the design, this injustice by design that was meant solely for us. What I just told you was the first wave of the Klan, but there was a second. And this time, The Klan didn't sneak in the back door. They came marching right down Main Street. The second wave began in 1915, right after the release of the film The Birth of a Nation, a film that didn't just rewrite history, it glorified the Klan, portrayed black men as predators, and helped inspire the Klan's revival. It was treated as a patriotic epic, shown in public theaters, praised for its historical sweep, and embraced by audiences all across the country, including at the White House, where it was shown to President Woodrow Wilson. It wasn't just propaganda. It was American cinema's first blockbuster, and it gave the Klan a brand new myth to march behind. Over the next 2 decades, this second wave exploded, more than 4 million members across the country by the 1920s and 1930s. In South Carolina, it followed suit. At least 22 Klan branches called Klaverns were formed in the state between 1922 and 1934. The branch in Greenville, where our story takes place, was called Poinsett Clavern number 26. It was established in 1931. And this version of the Klan was different. They still called themselves a secret society, but they weren't hiding anymore. They marched unmasked in parades. They held cookouts and pageants and even baseball games. They showed up like they were part of the community. And in some towns, they were. They were seen as respectable. They wanted political power. But behind all of that pageantry was the same old playbook. The Second Klan still dealt in violence, still operated as vigilantes, still carried out threats in the night. And when the Great Depression hit, they went back to their roots, recruiting poor white Southerners, raging against federal programs, and refocusing their attacks on black families. Lynching spiked again. And right here in Greenville, the Poinsett Clavern took its place in that design. They played both sides, moral enforcers and racial terrorists. They wanted obedience, they wanted fear, and they wanted power. And they used the same tactics they always had to get it. This was the environment that the chief character in our story found himself in, surrounded by hate, boxed in by injustice, and abandoned by the law. Now, I needed to tell you all of this because it's central to the questions we're exploring in this story and in this series. I needed you to see that our injustice was not by accident. It was not their accident. It was their design. It was their blueprint, being constructed piece by piece. And the violence, it was routine. It was chapter 2 in the Black Injustice Manual, right after the chapter on enslavement. Now let me tell you what happened to George Green. George was born sometime between 1868 and 1871 to Warren Green and Hattie Morgan. Some reports have him being born as early as 1859, which means there's a chance that he might have been enslaved. His parents were born in the 1840s. They were almost certainly enslaved. They experienced all the horrors of bondage and of subjugation. And when emancipation came, they would have been adults. They took on the only work available to newly freed black people. They worked the land. This also means they experienced the rise of the Klan. Everything I just told you about how the Klan came into South Carolina and began its reign of terror on us. Warren and Hattie saw all of it, might have even been victims of it. Yet they survived it. They raised George. And I think that's an important part of this story. It's something that we often gloss over in ancestry and in genealogy. It's not just that Warren and Hattie were enslaved and survived. It's not just that George was born during Reconstruction. It's that they raised their children in an environment that only wanted to see them fail. They loved George in an era and time of hate. And I don't want to get too deep into this right now because I need to move on, but just really think about that. Because it's hard now raising black children to enter a world that seems determined to stifle their advancement. But how do you raise a child in this, in a time where people still saw your family as property, who spend every day thinking of new ways to drag you back into chains? Slave, but now free. Property, but now citizen. That's what they wanted for George. That's what they hoped for. And I want you to reflect on that as we move through this story. Not just the loss, not just the injustice of the moment, but really all of it. This is something that Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about in his book, Between the World and Me. That when a black person is struck down by injustice, it's not just that moment that matters. It's the years behind it, the birthdays, the schooling, the time, the effort, the survival that was built and then suddenly lost. And I want you to think about that. That's why I took the time to really talk about the Klan and what was happening in South Carolina. Because I wanted you to see what black people, what Warren and Hattie and George had to survive. All right, so I have to stop now because I can keep going. But let me get back to the story. George grew up and worked hard, just like his family. He worked the land, and he eventually met and married a woman named Mary. The little we know about George before this incident tells us that he was bold and he was assertive. He was a black man known for being resourceful, someone who did not back down from a fight. George was a sharecropper, farming land owned by a white man named C.F. James. But James refused to pay what he owed. George had entered into a contract, one that entitled him to a share of the profits, and George intended to collect his share. Well, that didn't sit well with C.F. James. That's when tension started to rise. But remember what I said. George was resourceful. He took advantage of something that a citizen is supposed to have, the right to bring a dispute before a court of law. George brought his case against C.F. James before a local magistrate, a man named J. Ham Wood. He made his argument that they had agreed to terms. The land was his to work. The share was his to collect. And the magistrate agreed with George. He ruled that George didn't have to leave James' property. Now let me pause right here because I want you to sit with what George did. He went to court, and that might sound like a small thing today, but it was not small. Not for a black man, not in South Carolina, and not in 1933. Because when George Green took his case to the magistrate, he wasn't just saying, "Judge, give me a fair ruling." He was asserting his citizenship. He was saying, "I live here. I work this land. I pay taxes. And I have a legal dispute, one that deserves to be heard by a court of law." That's what a citizen says. That's what the Constitution says should happen. That is what the Declaration of Independence promised. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the promise. But for black people, that promise always came with an asterisk because the law was never neutral with us. This was the same court system that looked the other way during lynchings, the same courts that sentenced us to convict leasing camps and chain gangs, the same system that made us criminals just for being unemployed. So when George Green stood before a judge, he was doing something radical. He was saying, "I belong here. I am equal. I'm a citizen, and I will use the law the same way that it once enslaved me, to fight for what is mine." But what George learned, and what this country kept proving, was that black citizenship was never treated like white citizenship. We were citizens in name, but not in rights. We were protected on paper, but not in practice. And for George Green, that truth would come at a cost. I can imagine that when George left court that day, he probably walked out with his head high. He'd beaten C.F. James, a white man. I'm sure he thought, me, a black man, won against a white man in court. My family doesn't have to leave the land. We can get what we are owed, get what we've been working for from sunup to sundown. I won. He probably went home that day and told his wife Mary, "I won." Told other black people sharecropping nearby, "I won in court today." But here's the truth. Victory for black people was never victory at all, because we weren't playing in a system that treated us fairly. The rules were always shifting when we played the game. Victory for us meant someone else lost. And if that someone was white, it meant they lost to a black person. And that never ended well for us. A black victory was often just the first chapter in a black loss, a black brutality, a black injustice. Because whoever we beat rarely just took it and moved on. And that's what happened here. C.F. James wasn't just going to take a loss to George Green. Not in that courtroom, not in that county, and not in that time. And now we come back to that three-letter group we spent the first part of this video talking about. Because remember their purpose. Remember who they were targeting. Remember who they claimed they were keeping in their place. The Klan now enters to correct what the law got wrong, to undo justice, not to restore order, but to reassert the old one, to show that the rule of law didn't matter because they were the rulers of law, to prove that no courtroom could protect us, that no verdict in our favor will be left standing, to once again reaffirm what this country had always implied, that George Green and black people were not citizens, not entitled to rights, not protected by the system, not safe, even when we followed the rules. After his loss in court, C.F. James went to a man named Andrew Monk. Monk was a member of the Points and Clavern, the local Klan chapter in Greenville. James wanted the Klan to handle this, and he made his request plain. He told Monk in no uncertain terms, do whatever is necessary to get George Green to leave. That was all Monk needed to hear. A Klan meeting was called. 20 members showed up, and there was only one item on the agenda. Monk stood up, and he told the men what James wanted, and the vote was held. It was unanimous. This was a job only the Klan could do. They would make sure George Green was off that land, and they would make sure that he was taught a lesson about staying in his place. George got word of what the Klan was planning. A black man named Tom Means warned him that they were coming. Now, this would have been the time to flee, to leave, to disappear, to survive. And no one would have blamed George had he done that. If he had just said, he can have the crops, keep the money, I'm done. But that's not what George did. He was determined to fight for his life, for what was his and for what he was owed. So George prepared. He got an axe and he waited near the front door of his home, determined to protect himself and determined to protect Mary. On the night of November 16, 1933, George and Mary were at home. George was waiting, hoping they wouldn't come, but prepared just in case they did. And then they came. 20 men, robes, masks, the terror uniform we all know too well. The Klan had arrived. They came to George's door, not for questions, not for justice, but just for one thing, George. They shouted for him to come outside. George had nowhere to go, no path, no escape. He was completely surrounded. So he did the only thing he could. He ran to the back of the house, to the bedroom, where Mary was waiting. And from that bedroom, George shouted, I've got an axe. He wanted them to hear him, to know that he was ready, that if they dared to enter, that he would strike. He would not go quietly, not tonight, not in his own home. Now, I was reading this part late one night, and I kind of just stopped because when I prepare these stories, I resist the urge to rush, to say, and then this happened, and after that, and then next came this. I don't do that because that kind of storytelling, it flattens the moment. It really cheapens the truth, and it kind of minimizes what happened. This is not true crime. Like, I'm not doing this for some Jim Crow thriller. This is not entertainment. George Green was in that house. Mary Green was in that house, and their home was surrounded. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't fiction. This was real. It happened in real life, in real time. George's heart was racing. Mary couldn't catch her breath, even though she wasn't moving. Fear wasn't just in the room. It was in the air. It was running through them. Terror could be tasted. And those were our people, our ancestors, our relatives, our kin. And I really try to go back there, not to dramatize, not to sensationalize, but to truthfully situate us in the middle of their moment, to slow down, to feel what they felt, to see what they saw, to remember what they survived. Because only then can we tell this story honestly. So when I say George was in the bedroom screaming that he had an axe, don't just hear my words, hear his voice, hear the strength and the fear at the same time. See Mary in the corner looking at him, not knowing what was coming next, because they didn't know. And that's the part that we cannot forget. So here they were, George and Mary, waiting, every second feeling like an hour, waiting, waiting, and waiting. And then it happened. The Klan broke down the door. George swung his axe, but Klansman Ralph Stiles wasted no time. He fired 3 times, striking George in the chest. Mary was terrified, and she hid under the covers, praying. But they wouldn't let her be. They pulled their weapons on her, and one of them said they should whip her. Mary begged them for mercy, begged them to spare her, begged them to stop, begged them to leave. After shooting George, they dragged him to the living room. They shined a flashlight on his body, dying and bloody. They inspected him. They needed confirmation. Then one of them said, "We got him." They had accomplished what they came for. The black man who thought that he could take a white man to court. The black man who dared to stand up for himself. The black man who thought he had rights. That man was no more. And then they left, just as quickly as they came. Mary rushed to George. His life was slipping away. All she could do was hold him as he left this world. This is a moment you stop on. This is a moment that should really tug on the strings of your heart. What did she say to George? "I love you. Don't go. Don't leave me. I need you." Or did she say nothing at all? She experienced that terror with him. She watched it unfold. Maybe her body was too shocked to make a sound. George Green died right there, in Mary's arms. The police arrived at George and Mary's home. They found him on the floor, dead. Mary completely distraught. She did her best to tell them what happened. That it was the Klan, in robes and hoods and masks, that they came in and took her husband. The police claimed that they began to look for the lynchers, claimed they looked for 9 hours, scouring the surrounding areas, talking to people. But they said they couldn't find anyone, couldn't find a single clue. Now, that was odd considering that Mary said it was a Klan, and it wasn't exactly a secret who the Klansmen were in Greenville. What was even more odd was that George's lynching wasn't even the only Klan attack that night. Near Greer, about an hour from where George lived, the Klan dragged 2 black people from their homes and beat them. So the Klan was on the move, terrorizing black people across the area, and yet not a single clue as to who they were. Now, it's not like they couldn't find a clue. It's just that they didn't want to find one. They didn't want to say what they knew, didn't want to tell the truth, because silence was a part of the injustice plan. Because protecting them meant protecting the system. And that's what this was. It goes back to our series theme, injustice by design. A coroner's jury was convened to investigate, but by November 20th, it came back with a very familiar verdict. It couldn't identify George's lynchers. That well-worn phrase we've heard so many times before. George was lynched by unknown parties. But the truth was not unknown. Not to Mary, not to the police. Everyone knew what happened and who did it. George's lynching spread quickly. It was reported in the papers. The Klan had struck. And this was not good for South Carolina because remember, the lie of racism was that it didn't exist. Southern states were supposed to be havens of law and order. All this race talk was just exaggeration, just noise from northern agitators trying to stir up things. So the governor of South Carolina, Eber Blackwood, did what many have done in situations like this. He moved along with the appearance of justice. He ordered State Constable Fred Newman to go to Greenville to investigate. And for his efforts, Newman was threatened. The coroner was also threatened too. The message from the Klan was clear. Stop, right now. There will be no justice for George Green. Because in their eyes, they had already handed down justice. And if anyone tried to overturn that verdict, they'd hand it down to them as well. Constable Newman kept going. He didn't stop when the threats came. He didn't stop when the system shrugged. He kept investigating and he found some leads. And just 6 days after George Green's lynching, he was able to do something that the local police claimed they couldn't. He made arrests. Members of the Klan mob were taken into custody and charged. The men accused of taking George's life were G.L. Smith, H.G. Duncan, W.B. Harder, and J.D. Daly. But they didn't stay locked up for long. They were quickly released on $2,000 bond. That's nearly $49,000 in today's money. Andrew Monk, the man who organized the attack, and the landlord, C.F. James, the man who ordered it, were also charged as being accessories to the crime before and after the fact. And Constable Newman wasn't done yet. After more digging, he made even more arrests the following week, bringing the total number to 17. 2 well-known prosecutors were brought in to handle the case, L.G. Leatherwood and G. Lloyd Ford. And soon, a grand jury was convened to decide whether the state of South Carolina would indict George Green's lynchers. The points at Claver number 6 denied having anything to do with George's lynching, said it was all lies. Mary and the black people in Greer who saw them in their robes and their hoods, they said none of it mattered. Wasn't true. It wasn't us, they claimed. It was another clan, some sort of rogue clan, an unsanctioned clan. Now, I don't mean to make light of this, but I need you to see the absurdity of this. They were denying the undeniable. I mean, of course it was them. But this was 1933 in South Carolina, and they had gotten away with far worse. If they said it wasn't them, then it wasn't, and that was that. And that shows you what we were really up against here. That was the real enemy. Not just the men in robes, not just the ones with weapons and torches. We were up against something even more dangerous, and that is denial. The refusal to see us, the refusal to admit what they had done. Racism is the enemy of truth. It's born in a lie, and it's raised in denial. Deny our humanity, deny our rights, deny our citizenship, deny that George Green mattered at all. Because if they ever had to admit the truth, they would have to see us as equal, as deserving, as human. But instead, they built a whole system on saying truth doesn't apply here. Truth is what we say it is. And I'm going to come back to this later because what I just said is going to matter to you in a few moments, I promise. George's lynching was not just covered in South Carolina. It was reported in papers all across the country. In black newspapers especially, they carried the story with weight and purpose. The New Pittsburgh Courier reported on what happened in that small South Carolina town. So did the Chicago Defender, and it didn't just talk about George's lynching. It used it to sound the alarm. It told their readers that the lynching was not just a Southern problem. It was an American problem. It didn't just tell its readers about George's lynching either. It also reported on the lynching of a 17-year-old black teen named Lloyd Warner, who was burned at the stake after being accused of attacking a white woman. It gave the numbers, the names, and the details. And it told how the NAACP was trying to bring national awareness to this growing epidemic of racial violence. But the thing that struck me the most from the Defender article was a cartoon that showed how a lynch spirit was taking hold of America, how the country was descending into cruelty and barbarity. And that's why those black papers matter so much. The Courier, the Defender, the New York Age, the Black Dispatch, the Jackson Advocate, the Negro Star, the Atlanta Daily World, the Crisis Magazine, the Call, and so many more. They didn't just report the news. They educated, they informed, they raised awareness and sounded the alarm. That's what we needed. Not just celebrity gossip, not just entertainment, but truth. Truth about what was happening to us. Truth about the systems that were harming us. And sometimes I wonder what it would look like if we still had that, still had those papers, still had that commitment, still had that voice devoted to us. Not just stories to scroll past, but truth that stops you in your tracks. Truth that wakes you up. But it wasn't just black newspapers. It wasn't just us telling the truth. The State, a paper right there in Columbia, South Carolina, ran an editorial that put it plainly. It said that whoever was arrested and charged would no doubt be found not guilty. And if by some strange turn they were convicted, they'd be pardoned. Then it says something that still makes me pause. It said, the public should not worry. The privilege of masked men to invade a man's home and execute him was not in danger. I mean, did you hear that? These were things that were not being whispered. This was not hidden. This was published and printed and sent to homes all across South Carolina. Even the newspaper knew what was coming. Because in South Carolina, the lie would be protected. The men would walk free. And George Green's death will be written off as just another page in a book that was never meant to tell the truth. Now, remember earlier, I told you that I'd come back to something. I said racism was built on a lie, and that the lie had to be protected at all costs. The lie that we weren't equal, that we weren't citizens, that we weren't entitled to rights or justice or even to basic protection under the law. This editorial, it didn't just hint at the lie. It said it out loud. In satire, sure, but the message was clear. Don't worry. The lie will hold. No one will be held accountable. So now the question becomes, was that writer correct? Would George Green get justice? Let's find out. The trial was delayed for nearly a year, while the constable and the sheriff continued to investigate. It finally began on October 31st, 1934. Judge W.H. Grimble presided. I should mention that some of the Klansmen confessed after they were arrested, and at trial, they came forward to talk about what happened. J.D. Bailey testified. He told the jury exactly how it went down that night, and how after, another Klansman handed out alibis in case they were questioned. And then there was Mary Green, who held her dying husband in her arms. She braved that courtroom, and she told the truth. The defense, it was simple. We didn't do it. They claimed the Klan wasn't involved, that the ones who did confess were lying. They said the Klan usually checked in with the police before doing anything, and since no such coordination happened, it could not have been them. They said they wouldn't wear their robes for something like this because their robes were used for parades. They brought in alibi witnesses to back them up. They even produced forged receipts to prove that they were somewhere else that night. Before I tell you what happened, I want to make sure you really took in what their defense was because it is truly stunning. Their defense was, we didn't do it because we usually tell the police before we commit acts of vigilante violence. We let the police know first. So let me say it another way. We didn't do it because we usually get permission from the law to break the law. We alert law enforcement before we go out and terrorize black people. That was the defense, spoken out loud in the courtroom as if it made perfect sense. And what's even more stunning is it was meant to be taken seriously, but it tells you something that I've been saying all along. The rule of law didn't apply to black people. We were outside the law, beyond its protection, beyond its concern. In that defense, that shameful excuse said it plainly. When we take black lives, we make sure the law is in the loop on it. Before the jury even got the case, one of the defendants, Ed Parnell, was acquitted on what's called a directed verdict. That means his attorney asked the judge not to even let the case go to the jury because the evidence was so insufficient that the judge could just end it right there. And that's exactly what Judge Grimble did. He issued a directed verdict of not guilty for Parnell. Then the jury deliberated for 2 hours and came back with a not guilty verdict for the rest of the men on trial. After that, Solicitor Ford dropped all charges against the remaining Klansmen. And just like that, it looks like the editorial from the state newspaper was right. There was no scenario where George Green would ever get justice. The lie would be protected. Jim Crow will live to terrorize another day. 1933 had been another brutal year for black people in South Carolina. George Green was just one of 4 known lynchings in the state that year. In February, a black man named George Jeter was flogged to death by 4 white men in Aiken, allegedly for selling some of their bootleg liquor. On July 4th, Norris Denny was lynched after he won a fight with a white man. We've covered his story, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go back and watch because what happened to Norris is a part of this same brutal pattern. Then, on October 8th, Benny Thompson was kidnapped from jail in the town of 96, beaten to death by 4 white men after an argument over a woman. And then there was George Green in November. But that wasn't the end of George's story, because his wife, Mary, she took up the fight for him after this. Mary filed a lawsuit against the county and against C.F. James, who had died by this time. She was seeking $30,000 for George's lynching. She brought the lawsuit under South Carolina's anti-lynching statute. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, wait, what South Carolina statute? Well, at the time, the federal government refused to pass anti-lynching laws. But a handful of states, including South Carolina, had passed their own, kind of a way of discouraging the federal government from interfering in their affairs, as a way of saying, we have our own law. We don't need a federal law. Stay out of what we're doing. Let us handle this. South Carolina passed their law in 1896, and believe it or not, it's still on the books today. Under their law, a county could be held liable if it failed to prevent a lynching. Sounds promising, right? But here's the problem. The law was almost never enforced. The study in the 1930s found that only 6 counties had ever paid the fines. In most counties, they simply avoided paying by failing to report the lynchings or calling them something else entirely. Mary's case went to trial in December of 1934. She testified, and she told the court what happened that night, and the judge awarded her $2,000. But the county, it appealed the verdict to the South Carolina Supreme Court, and the court overturned it. Now, this is where things get a little legally technical. because the reason the verdict was overturned had to do with questions of credibility in the jury's role as the trier of fact, what is called the province of the jury. It's important, but I can't get into it in this video because if I do, I've got to put my lawyer hat on and start walking you through legal doctrines and jury instructions, and we'll be here for a very long time. So I'm going to come back to it in the series wrap-up video and explain exactly why the verdict didn't stand. But here's what I will say for now. As far as we know, Mary never got justice for George. But even though she didn't get justice in that courtroom, it doesn't change the fact that George Green was here. His life was stolen, but he was here. And it's important that we tell his story. This is actually George's death certificate. It lists the cause of his death, but it doesn't. And let me explain what I mean by that. The words are written as to how he died. It's accurate that he was fatally wounded. That is true. But it doesn't list the method. It doesn't spell out the injustice. It doesn't say that he was lynched. It doesn't say that because he was black, they felt that they could deny him his rights. And that's why we tell a story. We restore what they stole. We give him back. We say, George Green was here. George Green lived. He loved. He was here. Remember how we started this video? Talking about David Macy, the note and the warning he got, the bushwhackers who came to his home. But then that terror was perfected, and that perfection took the form of the Klan. George Green lived through that perfection, the perfection of brutality, the perfection of lawlessness, the perfection of denial, denial of rights, denial of truth, denial of citizenship. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, except if you're black. That's what that verdict said. We, the people of the United States, who came together to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to secure the blessings of liberty. Not for George. No blessings. No tranquility. No liberty. Only the promise of injustice. In light of all that we've learned, I think it's time I've said this again. Some say black people complain too much. They say we talk too much about what has happened to us. They say we're stuck in the past. They admit that it was bad, but they say, you can't still be mad about that. It was a long time ago. I didn't do it to you. I never burned a cross. I never lynched anyone. But that's not the question. The question is not whether you did it. The question is, what happened to those, to the descendants of those who suffered through it? What happens to a people who were never allowed to escape injustice, who couldn't escape slavery, couldn't escape convict leasing, couldn't escape the black codes or peonage, couldn't escape Jim Crow and segregation, couldn't escape the Klan, couldn't escape injustice because it was designed for them? What happens to them? What has happened to us, to black people, to our communities, to our families, to our futures? What about the injustice of your life? What do you carry that was caused by injustice? You see, black people fall into two categories: those with open wounds and those with scars. We either lived through it and made it out, or we're still in it now, trying to figure out how to get free. Injustice did that. Injustice is doing that. But here's the good news. I told you George's story, a story of horror and pain. George did not survive, and that's why we're telling his story. But someone did survive for you. Someone survived injustice for you. Someone survived sharecropping for you. Someone survived segregation for you. Survived the Klan for you. And yes, injustice is still here. It is still raging. It is still tearing through black lives, still wounding and wearing us down. But you have to survive it. You can survive it. Because millions of black people survived it. For us. Now it's our turn. And I know it's hard. It feels like everything that was up is now down and everything that was right is now wrong. Like the very things we once fought for, the things we were told were noble and true, are now treated like threats. Like what we call justice is now called division. Like somehow we became the danger. But truth is not decided by who shouts the loudest. Injustice doesn't expire just because people get uncomfortable. What was right is still right, and what was good is still good. And if we keep walking in that truth, then we are not lost. We are simply on the road our ancestors already paved. Brothers and sisters, keep going, keep breathing, keep resisting, keep living, keep pushing, keep thriving, keep taking care of your families, keep surviving. We know that racism is a lie, but your survival, that is the truth.
We have been black powerless people for 400 years. I've seen people boxed in, black children in Harlem of New York. I've seen people boxed in, black people in Chicago, Illinois, in the slums with the babies sick, rats eating on the babies. So what we mean by black power is we mean to have not only black political power, but black economic power, to have a voice in the educational system, that our kids will know, not only the black kids, but the white kids should know the kind of contribution that have been made by black people throughout this country. We want to determine some of our destiny. And this is what black power means. We want to have something to say about our...
Thought I would be, okay, let me get myself a... Oh, God. So, I just finished watching Michaela's Voice, A Letter to the World on Netflix. Bitch. That creator, Lady L, that does like the reviews of like movies and TV shows and stuff, I saw her come on here and she was crying. She'd be wearing her glasses so you really couldn't tell, but I could hear it in her voice. Girl, I can't believe I was crying like that. Anyway, Michaela's Voice, A Letter to the World on Netflix. It was beautiful. Like, she's so smart. She's so beautiful. Her family loves her so much. She's basically been an autistic nonverbal child her whole life. She's 14. And they found a woman that has taught her to use like a letterboard so she can communicate. And she's been like communicating her thoughts. It was beautiful. Just go watch it. Support it. It's short. It's only 24 minutes, but very impactful.
I'm waiting for this day so I may be able to speak from my family and speak to...
When people talk about black women being obese, I hate it because it becomes a way to blame us for a set of conditions that we didn't create. We're moving, we're taking care of kids, but our food quality suffers. We are living in the Trump era. And look, those policies kill our people. You can't get access to good health care, good insurance. The research says that black women, when we do the same diets as white women, we lose less weight and we lose it slower, even when we're following the diet, than our white women counterparts. And what public health practitioners think is that our stress responses in the body change our metabolism. It's literally that the racism that you're experiencing and the struggle to make ends meet actually means the diet don't work for you the same.
And it's very sad. But you people, just listen to the kids are crying. Women are crying. Because of this that is happening here. I even feel to cry. The kids are crying. Women's crying. Men's also. Just deporting somebody you love. Deporting maybe your mother. Deporting maybe your girlfriend. Maybe your friend deported. It's very sad.
on, Let's go back. Go back. We were riding down this block, and his white people start saying, "Get out of here, niggas. You know, get out of my neighborhood. Don't come to this neighborhood." And then they start hitting on her. Throwing rocks and everything else. Throwing rocks. Because we were in their neighborhood.
We went on a bike hike to McDonald's. We didn't mean to bother anybody.
We had a nice
we saw a parade, we saw a gathering, so we went down there to see what was happening. All right. I mean, we didn't bother anybody. We weren't looking for trouble. I never even know people around here were like that. I've never experienced anything like this in my life.
What happened to you?
Nothing happened to me, but this little boy, short boy about my size, or little short, had picked up a rock, and he was in the front of all these tall honkies. But he threw the rock. He tried to hit my sister, but he almost hit me about that much away from me. And I was sure which he had hit me with that rock. I would pick up the rock right next to me and hit him right dead in his face. They always say niggas are doing everything. They always say we're doing everything, right? Every time the white people come down the block, we don't push them out their neighborhood and throw rocks and start hitting them. We don't bother the white people around our neighborhood, but when we get in a white neighborhood, they just push us out.
Yeah. Everybody with us, they said we're nothing, you know, we're a piece of dirt, dogs. I mean, that's the way you treat an animal. I mean, God, we're human beings. You don't treat other people like that. It's just wrong. Black, white, I don't care. A person is a person. Skin should have no bearing on how you treat a person. That's just wrong.
I hate their goddamn guts.
I can't say that I hate them. I can't say that it's totally the kids' fault. I mean, I'm sure their parents had some bearing on the way they feel and everything else. I think it's just the system. I don't know. I can't say that I hate them because I don't hate anybody.
Do you forgive them?
No. No. Can't take back no hurt. But they gonna always do that. They always spit on us like we some dogs. They always gonna spit back on them. Ain't nothing gonna change.
A lot of people have been calling me the N-word or a monkey, even black boy. One girl said to me, "I would hit you, but that's called animal abuse." That to me, we should not get treated like this. We should get treated equally. This is not fair to us black people.